We can't make a fool of ourselves with the numerous cases of illegal detentions in Venezuela. They are private persons of their freedom in violation of any kind of right. And we demand their immediate release. Attention, friends, to the speech of President Javier Milei in the Mercosur. Aaron once said that the language was given to man to hide his thoughts. I think he correctly characterized the fact that the diplomatic discourse has been particularly transformed. Where many times in forums and meetings like this, the norm is to speak saying as little as possible, or saying it in such a way that it is in the plane of the subjective or interpretative. At this point they have already met me and they know that I do not believe in the messages. As we have always been, we prefer to say a difficult truth to say a comfortable lie. When one has a clear north, speaking clearly is the best way in that direction. Although at first it is expensive. That is why when we assumed the pro-tempore presidency of Mercosur, we were encouraged to say something that many of us have shared for a long time, but which was taboo and no one was encouraged to admit live. Although originally Mercosur was created with a noble intention of integrating the economies of the region, at some point the North went to the brink and joint commercial action ended up harming most of our citizens in favor of privileging some sectors. The barrier that we raised to protect ourselves commercially at a time that we considered valuable ended up excluding us from trade and global competition, and ended up punishing our populations with worse goods and services at worse prices, which contributed to the slight growth of our economies. At the same time, the organization demanded that we finance a bureaucratic structure, today already elephantish, dedicated to internal meetings, common guides and regulations on issues of internal law, and to duplicate forums that do not achieve the effect of promotion of the fundamental rights and freedoms of citizens. The balance of all this was Mercosur that met its original objective. If ease economic freedoms and deprive the privates of opportunities in the region, Mercosur, which is market and common, was less and less. We seek to put an end to what we consider destructive inertia. That is why we propose that, as a bloc, we move towards a much freer commercial and regulatory scheme, instead of the iron curtain to which we are today subjected, in which each country can enjoy greater autonomy to take advantage of its comparative advantages and its potential exporter. We understood the limitations that we faced when proposing a similar paradigm shift. On the one hand, because deep changes are not usually carried out very well with rigid structures. On the other hand, because we know very well the difference between talking and doing, and we know that it is much easier to demand the air than to propose concrete things. That is why we dedicated the exercise of our first pro-tempore presidency to translate the path proposed to tangible and feasible measures. First of all, we expanded the list of exceptions to the common external and so say that our citizens and companies can access more goods and services at an international price. We also advanced in our proposal to review the common external ANSO, which, as we all know, is excessively high and prejudicial for consumers in our countries. This ANSO should at least be taken to international standards, which could facilitate new commercial agreements in the future. In addition, Argentina later managed to close an agreement with Mercosur and the European Free Trade Association EFTA, according to its acronym in English. This result was possible thanks to the commitment of the state parties and the professionalism of our negotiating teams, to whom I wish to express my gratitude. The agreement with EFTA connects Mercosur with a highly competitive bloc, whose gross domestic product rises to $1.5 billion, and presents an average GDP per capita close to $95,000 per year, one of the highest in the world. This understanding establishes a modern and predictable legal framework that will allow us to deepen and expand the investments of the countries of EFTA in our region. We also celebrate the relaunch of the bond with the European Union, convinced that the agreement between both blocs represents a historic opportunity to consolidate a strategic association based on the complementarity of our economies. We also have a wide expectation to finalize this year the negotiations to celebrate a commercial agreement with the United Arab Emirates, to deepen the preferential trade agreement with India, and also to deepen the free trade agreement between Mercosur and Israel. This is added to the negotiations that we have launched between Mercosur and El Salvador, and to the negotiations that we expect to begin soon with Panama, in order to conclude free trade agreements. In terms of security, we face the enormous challenge of removing from the region the cancer of organized crime, fundamentally the drug trafficking that does not recognize any border and destroys us all. That is why, at the beginning of this pro tempore presidency, I proposed the creation of an agency of Mercosur against transnational organized crime. It is a resource that cannot wait. We need to act agilely, not stagnate in declarations or dates. We have to transform the commitments made by our governments into facts. Today I can announce that we have taken a great step, both in the recent meeting of our Ministers of Security, Interior and Justice, as well as a joint declaration of the Consultation Forum and Political Consultation at Mercosur, which have recommended creating this necessary agency in the course of this year. If the first command of the capital and of Emilo's command spread free Mercosur, the entire region will be in danger and it will be impossible to eradicate her from its country of origin. That is why I end this presidency by leaving this commitment to the next bloc presidency, in charge of Brazil, sure that together we will be able to provide Mercosur with a necessary tool to effectively combat organized transnational crime. In this same line, we cannot make a bold view. With the numerous cases of illegal detention in Venezuela, these are private persons of their freedom in violation of any kind of right, and we demand their immediate release. In particular, we reiterate our firm claim for the immediate release of the Argentine gendarme Nahuel Gallo. As I said at the beginning, we seek to take from the dialogue the gears of this body, understanding the dialogue as a starting point to achieve subsequent goals, and not an end in itself. From now on, we will seek to accelerate the march towards a deeper commercial opening, more deep and adequate to the reality of our peoples, which requires greater agility in bureaucratic times. It must be remembered that the cost of opportunity by administrative laziness is never paid by the bureaucrat, but by the businessman and by extension by the worker. They cannot be companies without markets, and they cannot be a worker as a company. Commercial isolationism lies in less and worse employment for our peoples, in salaries depressed by inactivity, and in markets closed by house envies that politics diagrams in its own benefit and that of its protectors. Each year that passes without greater commercial freedom is a year in which a company cannot grow or hire people, while the official in charge of managing these agreements will continue to make a salary. We must ultimately stop thinking of Mercosur as a shield that protects us from the world, and begin to think of it as a spear that allows us to penetrate effectively in global markets, a market of which until now the dam barriers have excluded us. And that is why, as a bloc, we have to establish logical trade conditions. We believe that this is the north of Mercosur. We know that many of us share it. We must not let our differences and accessory issues divide us. Now, we also know that adopting these ideas will result in an imbalance. Another, we are sure that the balance will be beneficial to all. Always a new order has its costs, especially in some sectors that were widely benefited by the previous Cuba statute. We cannot allow the defense of these interests taken from the past to prevent the achievement of the essential agreements that this bloc needs to survive and prosper. The future of the region and its role in the world depend on it. We must not lose sight of the fact that we are merely agents of the general will of our peoples, and not of the particular will of some sectors, be they businessmen or political activists. Our task in this forum cannot deviate from this sacred mission, and has informed each of the steps that we have taken in our quality as temporary presidents of Mercosur. Before I finish, I would like to thank the permanent and unconditional support of all the member states of the bloc to our sovereign claim for the Malvinas Islands, South Georgia and San Luis del Sur, and the surrounding maritime spaces. The islands are Argentine territory, occupied since 1833 by population implanted by the United Kingdom after being expelled by the forces of the Argentine authorities. I wish to reiterate my gratitude to all of you for accompanying the special declaration on the Malvinas issue. Your support reaffirms the regional commitment with a peaceful solution, in accordance with international law and the resolutions of the United Nations. To close, we want our pro-temporary presidency to be considered as a sincere exercise for Mercosur to adopt as a bloc the commercial pro-liberty reforms it needs. That is why we hope with the same sincerity that the next presidency will accompany the measures we have taken this semester. In fact, it would be a great joy that in a few years, when Argentina has the opportunity to preside over this bloc, we find ourselves in the final stretch to achieve the set of objectives. But if this were not possible and the members of the bloc were afraid to persist in a path that is not worked out for us, then we will have to insist on flexibilizing the conditions of society that unite us. We will undertake the path of freedom, and we will do it either or alone. Because as I have already said, Argentina cannot wait. We need more trade, more economic activity, more investment, and more work urgently. And that is why we need more freedom, also urgently. Our nation has decided to leave decades of stagnation behind and face the path of progress. It is on our partners at Mercosur to decide if they want to help us undertake the path we have chosen. Because our work is none other than to seek prosperity for our peoples. And from history we learn that it can only be found through free trade. Thank you very much to all. May God bless you and may the forces of heaven be with us. Thank you very much. Well, it is essential to continue remembering what is happening in Venezuela, especially with the criminal Lula sitting there, who is a great ally of Maduro. Even though in the last time he tries to get rid of Maduro, he is an ally of the region for Maduro without a doubt. So it is important that Miguel marks the field from there and reminds everyone that we have to do something with Venezuela. We have to do something, guys. It is already a situation that cannot wait any longer. So let's hope that at some point the gears start to move so that the tyranny and the dictatorship fall. Also speaking and remembering that there is an Argentine kidnap. I have to be careful, so let's hope that the United States, especially those who really have the power to act, put their eyes back on Venezuela now that the situation in Iran is coming down. And above all, to mark the field to those who were there at that meeting and are still making fun of Venezuela. On the other hand, this ultimatum of my law that we are going to do from Argentina on the road to economic freedom, accompanied by the Mercosur alone, always stressing my law with this of, guys, if the Mercosur does not serve to be able to trade freely, to be able to make trade agreements and to be able to trade with everyone, well, what is it for? Why are we in the Mercosur? If it is not to go and have meetings that do not reach anything. So it is important that Javier Milei marks the field and tells them, guys, you have to negotiate with the world. You have to negotiate freely. There are several Neanderthals there, right? It is difficult for one to make them sit in reason sometimes. But hey, it is very important that Javier Milei continues to mark the field in terms of the discursive and in terms of the cultural battle from all the places where he does it right. For example, here at the meeting of the Mercosur, because it is fundamental that in the places where these guys have proliferated their nefarious ideas, the Huac of freedom and the Argentine flag appears, in this case very well represented by President Javier Milei. Friends, I invite you, as always, to leave your like, to subscribe to the channel and to comment, so we get to each agenda and we continue to make this community grow more and more.